When the art day gets rough, you just gotta keep on punching. And here's your Thunder Punch Daily with Jersey Drozd.
Okay, we're going for a meaty one today. I've got a lot to say and think about when it comes to this topic. Now, as I explained in some recent Thunder Punch Dailies, Baron von Baron, the case of the Two-Faced statue, is a fantasy adventure, I should say spooky fantasy adventure for middle graders, graphic novel. And when I say those words, certain expectations get conjured. When you say a fantasy adventure, well, there's probably going to be some kind of physical peril, right? Yes, indeed, that is in there. I really love stories with thrilling action and adventure. But an idea that's very important to me and has been for a long time is I want my stories to have that thrill of physical peril, but I never want to glamorize violence as a solution to problems. Now, this is my thing. This is my personal value that I'm not trying to prescribe on anybody else. I'm just explaining. Part of the flavor of this book comes from this value. And in order to explain it properly, I feel it's important to provide some context on my upbringing, on my background, and my relationship with this idea of violence and why I feel the way I do about it. So let's set the stage, and then I'll get into some specific examples. So I grew up in a fairly chaotic home. I have a lot of siblings. I have 6 siblings. And when I was growing up, my dad was going to college. My mom was trying to assist him with his work in his career and pursuing his degree. And I was the second oldest of the 7. And so I received I interpreted a sense of responsibility to help manage the chaos of this house. And something that I think that I developed, I think I have this as like an innate sort of part of just who I am, as an animal, but also from that environment is I've always described myself as not a shy kid, but I was always a sensitive kid. I was always hyper aware of what everyone around me was signaling in terms of how they feel. Now, when I say that, I don't mean to suggest that I'm always right. I'm not psychic, but I'm very tuned into what's happening around me in terms of people and their expressions and their emotions. So you got that. You got like this very sensitive kid. And I grew up not only in a chaotic home, but in a very rural community. So Beale City, Michigan, which is a farming community whose nearest neighbor city is a town called Mount Pleasant, which is like maybe got 30,000 people. Beale City, I don't know what the population is now, but when I went to school there in the early 80s, this is another important detail, the early 80s, there were 250 students from K to 12 in the whole school. I think my grade had, 20 kids, maybe a little less than that. It changed when we got to middle school and then we merged with like the local Catholic school and so on, but in this rural community, what I interpreted as the key values, the values that I most remember readily receiving, was that football and the heroism of tackling other people and overcoming people physically was the most celebrated thing. Our football team was very important to the school. I remember going to a lot of pep assemblies where they put on elaborate skits about how the Beale City Aggies are to crush the opposition. I didn't really care about football. I've never enjoyed it as a sport. I remember trying to play it as a kid and thinking the whole idea of like that kind of contact was really scary to me. I loved baseball. I loved playing baseball, and I kind of liked playing basketball too. But and I was on the track team when I was in middle school, but football never appealed to me. The aggression of it just felt really scary. Again, sensitive kid, right? But the messaging I got was, these boys you see who are ready to just smash each other all the time and walk around with these giant bodies, that's what manliness and heroism looks like. And indeed, I remember, because I didn't pay attention to football, I came to school one day wearing the wrong colors. Our team was going to play against, I think the town was named Pine Green. I think that was the opponent's school, and their colors were green. I wore green to school that day, and a kid came up and started choking me on the playground in this mock sort of manliness of like, oh, you're wearing the wrong colors, I'm going to get you. And he starts choking me. I turned to the playground supervisor for like, hey, you going to let this happen? And she chuckled. She thought it was funny that we were acting out this drama of masculine braggadocio conquering somebody else physically. And I remember just it feeling really, really, I felt powerless and scary in that kind of environment. I felt scary. I felt frightened in that environment. So, and bullying happened on the playground back then. And really it was like the messaging I got from most of the adults. I had some really good teachers who really supported me. Mr. Norton was one of those people who like, I felt seen by that man. But most of the time, the messaging I got was like, rub some dirt on and get back in there, be a man. And I'm like, is there any other examples of manliness I can look for? Well, let's look at what was happening in media at the time, right? The first movie I saw by myself was Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Yeah, I was 11 years old, and I got dropped off at the movie theater, and I went in, bought a ticket, and sat in the theater by myself and watched that movie. Now, I loved Indiana Jones as a kid. I still like those movies today, although my relationship with them is a little bit more complicated. But when you look at what those stories are about, Indiana Jones, the hero, and as a kid, I remember thinking like, oh, there's something really vulnerable about him as a hero. Like he actually expresses when he's feeling pain, and it's funny and it's heartbreaking at the same time. But there's that famous scene where he's in Raiders of the Lost Ark, where he's chasing those guys across this marketplace. They've kidnapped Marion. She's in a basket and she's calling for help. And he's running after her, and then all of a sudden, like, the dramatic swell happens, dun-dun, and then the crowd parts, and there's this guy with a scimitar who's menacingly flipping it around and laughing. And Indiana Jones just looks kind of exhausted and disgusted and pulls out his pistol and shoots the guy dead. Cold-blooded murders, right? And what happens? The crowd cheers. They're not horrified that they just watched a murder happen. They're like, hooray! That big scary guy is dead. Right? What message does that send to me, right? How do you show your superiority? You physically overwhelm and overcome somebody. And I mean, John Mulaney even had something in one of his recent stand-up specials where he was kind of making fun of the idea of Back to the Future, Marty McFly. What's that story? What's the heroic journey of the story? He has to teach George McFly to stand up for himself and be a man. How do you do that? You punch Biff in the face, and then Lorraine's going to fall in love with you, and then you're going to go through the biological imperative and have lots of children, right? One of my favorite cartoons growing up was G.I. Joe, Real American Hero. Just recently talked about that in an episode about 3 remote and dangerous locations. And man, there's a lot of punching in that show. And there's very little in the way of showing any kind of restraint or regret over having to pound a guy with your fists. As a matter of fact, one of the motifs that in my 20s, I thought was really funny was the pile of cobras motif, where Duke gets overwhelmed by 6 or 7 cobras, and you literally just see him fall off screen, and you just see the arms going up and down at the bottom of the screen. So he's getting pummeled by these guys. So, as a sensitive kid who was experiencing all this input of this is what manliness looks like, and then I say, but it's scary and I don't like it. Yet I'm attracted to it, right? I loved the adventure of the G.I. Joe cartoon and the Indiana Jones movies. I still like Back to the Future. I don't hate the movie because of this, but I'm pointing to the cognitive dissonance that comes out of this, in that I love that, but when I encounter it in real life, it's way scary. So internalizing these messages and not having a whole lot of adults to give me a lot of guidance to parse this, right? I started a fight one day on the playground. And I thought, well, this is what men do. I want to be a man after all. And I hit a kid. And there's no way I hurt that kid, right? In retrospect, when I think back on it, I was a scrawny little thing. I'm sure I surprised him, but that I could show such aggression. I'm not going to disparage aggression either. I think it's an important emotion. But expressed in that very unsophisticated, like animal way was really scary. And I did not like it. So I was really conflicted as a young person about this idea of like, well, if manliness means physical domination, why do I hate it so much? Am I not a man? And as I got older, I started thinking about, I started like doing my own self-parenting and realizing that, okay, in some of these stories, the ones that I really like, I think the violence is more symbolic of something. Oh, I see. Back to the Future isn't really about saying that like being a man means punching people. It means that George McFly isn't going to let this guy push him around anymore. He's going to create some boundaries. And if that boundary means he has to punch him once, well, then so be it. I was missing a sophistication in the message that maybe was more implicit. And I'm ready to face the argument that it's not that sophisticated of a message in that movie, right? It is what it is. But I realized that as I was watching and reading more and in encountering story in a more thoughtful way, I was realizing the ones that I really, that enliven me are the ones where I think the violence is not being celebrated, but it's more of a serving as a metaphorical way of exploring this idea of establishing boundaries between characters, saying that you shall not pass kind of thing. And later on, better yet, I started encountering stories like Avatar: The Last Airbender. I'm sure as I've been exploring this, you've been saying like, well, Jersey, what about Avatar: The Last Airbender? Sure, but that didn't come along until I was well into my adulthood. But when I saw it, I was just on fire. I was like, this is it. Your main hero is a pacifist, and you've abstracted the violence of physical peril to this kind of thing called bending, right? So you can have really satisfying, engaging action, physical conflict where it's been pulled back a step and it's not saying like, look how cool it is to crush a guy's jaw, right? Look at how real this feels. So here's a perfect example of like the dissonance at work in my adult life. I went to PowerCon, which is the annual He-Man convention, typically held in Anaheim, California, but it's moving around now. And Mark Taylor, who was he's the guy credited with designing the He-Man action figure and designing the Skeletor action figure. And there are plenty of documentaries out there where he's being interviewed about it and talking about where the idea for Skeletor came from, which is actually kind of a haunting idea if it's true. He said it, so I'm going to believe it. But I'm at this convention, and there's a panel where Mark Taylor's up on the stage, and somebody asks a question about the origin of He-Man as a character. And now remember, Mark Taylor is the toy designer who designed the figure. He did not write the Filmation cartoon series, which is very different, right? Like, this is one of the reasons I love the Filmation show so much, is that in that, He-Man always acts with restraint, and he even says, like, I only fight when I have to, and each time I hope it's the last time. He won't even hurt trees. There's episodes where, like, to save his friend's life, it seems obvious he has to like, kill a tree, and he won't do it, right? That's why I love that cartoon so much, because it was like one of the few media signals I had in the world that said, like, no, it's okay to not like hurting things. Anyway, going back to the convention. Mark Taylor responds to the question with saying, have you ever been punched in the face? And this wave of something moved through the crowd, and I looked at the guy next to me, and we both were like, what the heck? What's he going to talk about? And he said, you've ever experienced that savagery of having somebody trying to physically push you down? I'm paraphrasing now, but he basically is describing the tension, anxiety, excitement, and thrill of being engaged in physical conflict. And he said, that's what He-Man was supposed to be. When I was making the character, that's what I wanted him to be, the savagery of barbarianism. And I was like, woo! I'm a fan of myself over here. I am glad that the Filmation show did not go in that direction, because I don't think I would love the character the way I would if Mark Taylor had his way. And that's fine. That's his. That's not mine, right? My reaction is mine, but like, he can have his interpretation of the character, and I am not going to get into a Twitter fight about it. My point is, though, is that stories like Avatar, where the hero is even being told by all of his past lives, now you gotta go murder that guy. The only way to stop this problem is to kill the villain. And in the context of when that show was made, That's what most adventure fiction has told us, right? Adventure fiction ends with the villain falling in a pit and dying. Superman 2, man, I love the Christopher Reeve Superman, but Superman 2 ends with that unfortunate scene where he crushes General Zod's hand and throws him in a pit. Like, no, you don't do that, Superman. What are you doing that for? Even more recently, in relatively modern, like, recent movies, Rise of Skywalker, one of the sequel trilogies. Now, I don't have a whole lot of skin in the game in the Star Wars world. I like Star Wars like everybody does, but I don't have like, tattoos, and I don't have all the action figures and anything, but I wanted to watch the sequel, so I want to see what they do with it. And there's that scene at the end, Rise of Skywalker, if you haven't seen it yet, and you really want to, spoilers ahead, but there's that scene where Finn, who's revealed to be Force sensitive, is like on the surface of one of the Star Destroyers or whatever with like some other former Stormtroopers, and they're really talking about this idea of how Stormtroopers have all been like dealt a bad hand and sort of been manipulated by the Empire, and it's unfortunate and everything. And I'm sitting in the audience, and it occurs to me, it's like, oh, Finn's going to do a reverse Order 66. He's going to use his Force sensitivity to reach out to all the other Stormtroopers and say, you don't have to do this. You can turn on the Empire, and it'll be a bloodless coup. And wouldn't that be such a subversion of the traditional Star Wars movie, which ends with the bad guys blowing up in a thing, right? And I got really excited. I'm like, oh my gosh, they're going to do it. They're going to do it. They're going to subvert it. And then, no, we're just going to blow up the spaceships, all the bad guys in it, and then we're going to throw a whole bunch of rocks at the Emperor and smash into pieces and so on. I'm like, oh, okay. And it was so disappointing to me. Because there's expectations in when you write in genre fiction, there's certain things you expect to see, and meeting those expectations is part of the job, I think, of the writer. But also, like, inventing a little bit would be cool too. And that's the thing I want to invent against. Is I want my stories to have all of the liveliness and real danger, physical peril, and also emotional peril that adventure stories have provided me. But I want to sidestep that cognitive dissonance. I want to show that in my view on heroism, again, this is mine. I'm not trying to say that this is my prescription for the world. This is why this book is so important to me, is that heroes help. And violence is the very, very last choice. If there is literally no other choice, right? He-Man says, I only fight when I must, and each time I hope it is the last time, right? So, in my book, the heroes find another way to get around the problem, or to heal the problem. Heroes help. Another way of using the word help is to heal. Is their way to heal the villains. One of my favorite... like the moment I knew I loved Doctor Who, because I didn't really watch it that much as a kid. I was aware of it, but somebody pointed me at the David Tennant Doctor Who series. Like, you in particular would love it, Jersey. I'm like, all right, I'll check it out. And I watched this episode, and I forget the whole story around it, but the main thing is the villain is like this person who's involved with the Cybermen and whatever, and she's kind of been like gotten a little bit drunk on the power and having the ability to make the world in her image kind of thing. And David Tennant says, like, if you just look at what you're doing, you'd see there's another way. We can find another way. I can help you get what you want, but not this way. And she does the villainous thing where she laughs like, aha, you can't stop me. And he just says, and this is his little catchphrase that he says, and all the David Tennant ones say, I'm so sorry. And he holds up the sonic screwdriver and does the thing where he makes her see what she's become. And the horror of seeing what a monster she's become makes her sort of destroy herself, right? And there's the regret. I'm so sorry that I have to do this thing. You've given me no other choice. And it's not even an act of violence. It is an act of violence in the sense that it causes her destruction. But she causes her destruction, right? So, like, that kind of thing. Like, finding a way to have the thrill of the peril without saying, and doesn't it feel good to punch a guy in the face, right? That is what confused me as a child. That was what made me go, like, but I love this stuff, but hurting people feels really wrong. I would like to, like, all of the fiction I've been writing for the last decade has been trying to move in that direction and address that as carefully and as artfully as I can. Did I say it all? Overcoming with violence is something that I feel should only be done when absolutely necessary. You know, the example I always use is like, yeah, if a bear comes into my house, I love animals. I'm a vegetarian because I want to cause as little harm as I can to animals. But if a bear comes in my house, I'm going to do what I can to get it out of the house, right? But, so I'm not saying that always, it's never a solution. I'm saying it's a last solution. And I think it's philosophically something I feel like I have a responsibility to represent in my adventure fiction. So that's where I'm at, and that's why this book is meaningful to me, because I feel like the ending of the book, where the heroes say to the villain, you know, there's a scene where Baron von Bear says, "I'm not here to fight you," and the villain says, "But you're gonna." And the villain keeps coming at him, and he's like, "But I'm not here to do this. This is not what I'm here for," you know. And he finds another way, and yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons why the ending of this book is so darn emotional for me, because I feel like it's what I needed to see as an 11-year-old. As I was looking around to every adult in my life, going like, but it's scary, and hurting people like really sucks, right? Like, well, that's what you do. That's what men do. Well, won't somebody give me a different response? Or am I just nuts? Am I just like improperly aligned to the world, that I see this thing that feels clear as day to me, but nobody else seems to agree with it? It must be me. I must be wrong. Nope, you weren't wrong, kid. It's okay. You're right to be afraid of it. And you're right to not want to do it. And so here's a story where the heroes acknowledge that as well. Whew, okay. Thank you for believing in this project. If this was intriguing to you at all, if you find that like that resonates, that, you know, or that makes me curious, BaronVonBear.com is where you can find out more about the book. You can sign up for the newsletter, pre-order, all of those things. Support this project that means so much to me. And if this, you know, journey through thinking about action versus violence was interesting to you, I submit the book will be interesting to you too. I think you will enjoy it. So thank you for going to check that out. If you have any thoughts, questions, or wonderings based on what you listened to today, and you'd like to follow up on it, BaronVonBear.com/AMA, ask me anything. That's a page with a form where you can submit your thought, question, and wondering. It's completely anonymous. There's a field to ask the question. There's also a field to provide some context as to why you're asking this thing, and then I will address it in future Thunder Punch Daily. So until next time, remember, everybody.
Sometimes movies and television adventure series like this one make it seem as though shooting a gun, fighting, and taking chances are fun and exciting things to do. And what's more, the good guys never get hurt. But in real life, people do get hurt, even killed when they fight or use guns. Make-believe can be fun, and there's nothing wrong with imagining great adventures. But never forget that when it's the real thing, someone can get hurt. Even the good guys. Even you.